Um, I wanted to weigh in on the Christchurch shootings in New Zealand. Um, it's interesting. One of the things I wanted to focus on is the things that the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I think Jacinda Ardern, I guess I'd say Ardern. Um, so she was talking about how New Zealand has so many different languages and so many different people groups and cultures and so forth. So basically, she was in effect saying that the immigration policies of New Zealand are really responsible for the shooting, because the way she described New Zealand was it's a recipe for disaster. that the policy, this open society policy of George Soros, that they're exercising all around the globe in the Western world and in the white world especially, is a recipe for disaster. In other words, this is exactly the kind of thing that you might expect to happen, because the policies that they have are all geared towards replacing the white population. There's a war on whites, and if the government's taking the side of facilitating the people that are going to replace the whites, then they're causing this to happen. Just the so. As far as the shooting, going into a mosque and shooting, I don't approve of that. That's not the point here. The point is that if people feel as if your policies are designed in such a way to destroy them, then they have to act in their defense. So although I'm not, it's not something I would do. I wouldn't condone it. I wouldn't fight in any wars. The only war I would actually fight in is if there was actually people, approaching my house, that I had to defend with guns. But I don't believe in national wars anymore. I don't believe in the idea that a nation like the United States should be going around the world policing the world. But in this situation in New Zealand, the way to prevent these kinds of clashes of civilization is not by bringing in people of diverse religious beliefs and forcing them to live together. And they're not just doing that, but they're also replacing the white population in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand and the United States and Canada and so forth. The goal is to replace whites and get them to interbreed and so forth, and because white people are probably the most likely to want to stand up against the control freaks of the New World Order. And so if it's I listened to, it's funny because I listened to first thing I did, listen to Red Ice Radio on this topic, and they covered a lot of points that I was going to make anyways, about, like, for instance, how Madeleine Albright said it was killing 500,000 children and Iraq to justify whatever was the social engineers wanted to accomplish. 49 is a lot less than 500,000. 500,000 is justified. As far as this guy, the shooter, is concerned, and he was doing the same sort of thing. In other words, the only reason that people like the State Department would condemn him, but justify what our military does with killing, is just because our military has more guns. The police in New Zealand has more guns than this guy did. Otherwise, he would set the policy. That's really. It's not like, okay, it's not like one thing is justified and the other thing is not. If the New Zealand government is allowed to have more firearms than the citizens, that's the only thing that justifies their actions. You see what I mean? In other words, if the people had more firepower, then they would be justified. So that's not. I don't buy this idea that this guy is doing anything different than the government would do. You know what I mean? It's not. I don't see why. If we're not going to condemn the government for wars, why are you going to condemn this guy for carrying out warfare? That's, what's he supposed to do? I don't understand. If you have policies that are directed towards destroying his people group, then what's he supposed to do? I don't understand. Okay, now what I would do. I'm certainly not interested in killing people, but what I would do is see to it that these people groups are not mixed, that they're free association. That was the whole original idea. When, for instance, European Christians were coming to America, where the idea was free association, and that means discriminating against who you wish, and including who you wish, and excluding who you wish. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's completely morally correct. It's what God would want people to do. It's the correct thing to do. People are not to be forced together, especially if you have different religions. So really, if anybody's in the higher moral ground, it's me. I'm more moral than the shooter, and I'm more moral than the Western governments, because I'm interested in allowing people to have what they want in free association. And so this is really to me that's the stem of the problem is people who want to control and force other people to live together who shouldn't be forced to live together. And they've brainwashed society into thinking that there's some kind of moral obligation to live together with people you don't have anything in common with. That's not your moral obligation. Your moral obligation is to separate. The governments of the West are violating their moral obligation to allow people to separate. That the governments of the West are doing the great evil. And that's where the great evil comes from. That's what they're responsible for, this shooting. This guy, the guy who actually did the shooting, has less guilt on his hands than the government of the West, the New Zealand government and so forth, because they're the ones that are setting these policies that are immoral. It's immoral. It's evil to ask people of various religions to live together like that. That's not the right thing to do. You should respect the religions and have them live separately. That's the respect that they're not getting paid. That's not the respect that's not being paid. That's by the governments. The governments are not paying respect. The governments are doing violence against the people. So that's my take on this. It's not. I'm not interested in condemning this guy if the governments of the West don't apologize for their policies. Why? What the guy's only doing what you'd expect them to do under those conditions. So when when the Prime Minister of New Zealand apologizes for her policies, then I can condemn this action that this guy's doing. But let's have a level playing field. Let's everybody who's guilty be held accountable. And to me, the most guilty, because this guy, this shooter, isn't the guy that caused the problem in the first place. It's the government of New Zealand. And this is why I don't believe in America. And it's not that I hate Americans or I want to see them all die or anything like. No, the idea is that we could do better than what we're doing by separating, by deciding, okay, how are we going to separate this game of trying to get people to live together who shouldn't, is just something the control freaks are doing, that are in charge of controlling everything, because that way they can empower themselves by having these people fighting one another, whatever it is that is causing problems between these groups. They're being controlled by the referee class. So it's just a way of controlling people. And if the governments of the West respected people, they would be facilitating these separations and giving people sovereign nations, let them split up. That would be the morally correct thing. I mean, that's why I'm not all excited about Trump, because I don't see him talking about let's divide the nation up into different countries and let them go their separate ways. It's not going to interfere with commerce. Commerce is going to go on. People are never going to stop trading. That's a lie. So let me take that and springboard into this. Jesus used to call these people the children of Satan, or in the book of Revelation, they're called the synagogue of Satan. And so those are the ones that are controlling, those are the ones that are behind these policies that are causing this violence. And so I found some interesting articles. Let me look at this so this is something came in the mail from my mom, and Faith Freedom Coalition, or Faith and Freedom Coalition. And it's a survey of 10 million Christian Americans. And, they're behind. The idea is to get behind Trump and conservatism and so forth. But the thing is, why should we do that? There's a lot of people that in America that don't share Trump's values. So why are we going to use the federal government to force our conservative values onto people that don't want them? Shouldn't we be splitting the country up, and say, look, you guys are liberal, you can have this and that, and we're conservative, we can have this and that. That's the correct, proper, and moral, respectful way of doing things. Not what we're doing. This is a joke. Anyway, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Newt Gingrich, yuck. Okay, now Michelle Bachmann I like a little bit. Rand Paul I like a little bit. Sarah Palin, she's okay. Rubio I don't like, and Ben Carson's okay. Ted Cruz I don't like. But even the ones I like here, Ben Carson and Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann, they're still caught in this game of thinking that we got to use the government to force conservative values on people that don't want it. That's not right. What we should be doing as conservatives is seeking to secede. So there should be secessions going on all over the place. And the federal government, that should be their last role before they close the door and turn the key in. It's that they, make sure that all these different people groups have their own separate societies. But it's interesting. Now, I read Ben Carson's book, and that's basically what his book is. Just the typical, wrong idea of conservatism being forced on people that don't want it. Let the conservatives have a conservative country, and the liberals have a liberal country. That's the right way to go ahead about it. That's the peaceful, loving way to respect your fellow man. Not force everybody to live together. That's evil. So along those lines, I got some of Satan's newspaper, otherwise known as the New York Times. And so it's always interesting. Jesus said, "Be wise as serpents," and so that means we got to be on to Satan's games. And the best way to do that is just read the New York Times. That's one of the best ways to do it. So here's an article here. U.S. ignores threats of democracy in Eastern Europe. Okay. U.S. ignores threats of democracy in Eastern Europe. Okay, so my first reaction is, why is it any of our business? It's Eastern Europe. That's not us. Why are we? Why? Who is this? Who's trying to make us believe that we need to do something? Stick our nose and okay, now democracy. Let's talk about democracy. Democracy is a word, you heard this saying, make the world free for democracy. Okay, that's, in other words, go kill people, go murder, thousands and millions of people for this thing they're calling democracy, to make the world safe for democracy. Well, democracy is just a cipher meaning control by the Rothschilds. Okay, so U.S. ignores threats to Rothschild control in Eastern Europe. That's really how this should read. So anytime you see the word democracy, you just replace that with Rothschild control. Okay, so Warsaw and Budapest this week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned bluntly of security threats from Russia and China, but he did not overtly criticize the assault on liberal democracy by Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, who has systematically stripped the courts, media, and academia of their independence. No, he's stripped those. He stripped the courts, the media, and academia of the neo-Bolsheviks. That's all he's doing, and so. That's another word. If you want to replace democracy, you can replace it with neo-Bolshevism instead of Rothschild control, but they're synonymous. And in Warsaw this week, Vice President Mike Pence spoke out against Iran, but had no harsh words for Poland, the first European Union member to face possible sanctions from the bloc for weakening democracy. In other words, for weakening the control of the neo-Bolsheviks and the synagogue of Satan. And the rule of law. Okay, well, here's a rule of law. The rule of law should be mind your own business and accommodate people's right to free association, to include or exclude whoever they want. That's the rule of law that I obey. Okay, that's the one that God laid down. Let me see. Okay, the rule of law. Instead, he praised Poland is still shaken by the killing of a leading opposition politician last month as a bastion of freedom in Central Europe. Well, they are. And I guess this guy that got killed was probably a neo-Bolshevik. The trips of Mr. Pompeo and Mr. Pence made it clear that the erosion of democratic values and institutions in Eastern Central Europe does not rank high on the Trump administration's agenda. Well, see, that's one of the things I like about Trump, is that, because let's reread that sentence as what it's really saying. Okay, the Pence and Pompeo made it clear that the erosion of Bolshevik, neo-Bolshevik, Rothschild control and institutions in Europe does not rank high in Trump's administration. We know very well that the Trump administration is not interested in this topic, said Roman Kunznier, a professor in Warsaw University and a foreign policy advisor of Poland's former president, Bronislaw Komorowski. They are coming from a different planet. No, they're coming from freedom, and the planet that you think you want to control, the neo-Bolshevik, is the planet that they're rebelling against. Let's see here. Jonathan Katz, a former State Department official who is now at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, said that ignoring a retreat from democracy and human rights was a recipe for insecurity. So we're supposed to think Okay, and this is how people were fooled in World War II or World War One. You know, they bought this stuff, but New York Times can no longer sell this stuff. People are wise. They know they know how to read this now. They know that what he's saying is, it's not a retreat from democracy. It's a retreat from Rothschild control. And so the people who support Hungary and Poland are on the right side of the issue. It's just like General Patton said in World War II. You know, we fought on the wrong side. We should have been fighting the Bolsheviks, not the Germans. Since returning to power in 2010, Mr. Orban has meticulously reshaped the country, constructing what he has called an illiberal state. And that leaves little room for independent voices. He and his allies have exercised ever greater control of the election process, the judiciary, news organizations, education, even cultural institutions. Yeah, they're getting rid of they're scrubbing the country of the neo-Bolsheviks. In late 2018, restrictions imposed by the government forced Central European University, an American institution founded by philanthropist George Soros, to move from Budapest to Vienna now. Now the government is taking control of awarding Academy of Sciences research grants, raising new fears about academic freedom. So George Soros is the philanthropist. So if George Soros is a philanthropist, isn't this guy that went on a shooting spree in New Zealand a philanthropist? I mean, if you're going to call George Soros a philanthropist, you know, let's level the playing field. Let's see. Okay, so now here's another interesting one. American Jews and Israel Jews break up. Okay, so I thought this was very interesting. Okay, this is also from Satan's newspaper, the New York Times. The events of the past year brought American and Israel Jews ever closer to breaking point. President Trump, beloved in Israel and decidedly unloved by a majority of American Jews, moved the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in May, with the fiery evangelical pastor John Hagee and Robert Jeffries consecrating the ceremony. In October, after the murder of 11 Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, President Trump went to that city to pay respects. Members of the Jewish community there came out to protest Mr. Trump's arrival, declaring that he was not welcome until he gave a national address to renounce the rise of white nationalism and its attendant bigotry. So, this is very interesting. Why did the Jewish people find it take it upon themselves to oppose white nationalism? You know, shouldn't they be? What they should be doing is supporting white nationalism and understanding that if they don't like it, they need to secede and start their own. You know, there's a lot of land here in America. I see nothing wrong with the Jews and the liberals and whoever else wants to join them, starting their own states that are separate from the rest of us. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the morally correct thing to do. Okay, part of the distance between Jews in the United States and Israel, Israeli Jews, may come from the stance that Israeli leader is taking on the world stage. Mr. Netanyahu has embraced the increasingly authoritarian Hungarian leader Viktor Orban, who ran a blatantly anti-Semitic re-election campaign. He has aligned himself with ultra-nationalists. Okay, so this is really interesting. Let's talk about that. Why is Hungary? Ask yourself this question: why is Hungary wanting to have a nation for Hungarians anti-Semitic? Why is that anti? Why is it considered anti-Semitic? Is it? See, it sounds to me like, okay, let me let me exercise my IQ here and say it sounds to me like the neo-Bolsheviks don't like the fact that they're not able to control Hungary or Poland. They want to control everything in the whole world, and the controllers, control freakism is the root of all evil. That, the Bible says money is the root of all evil. Well, that's why, because money allows you to control everybody. I mean, look at the Rothschilds print all the money in the Western world, and they lend it, and we owe, and they're the only people that are allowed to counterfeit money. I'm not allowed to print my own money. Why are they allowed to print their own money? See, that's and so when these nations like Hungary decide that they want to be part of that scam, then they get slandered as being anti-Semitic. Well, what does that tell you? Who's controlling the world? The Israeli Prime Minister was one of the very few world leaders who reportedly ran interference for the Trump administration after the murder of the Saudi journalist. Let me see. Okay, the president's, Netanyahu's son, Yair, was temporarily kicked off Facebook for writing he would prefer that all Muslims leave the land of Israel. Well, there's nothing wrong with that statement. That's a correct preference to make. You know what I mean? That's the morally correct, God-blessed stance on the issue. We have to obey God, not man. And there's nothing wrong with that statement. He's not saying kill all Muslims. He's saying let them go somewhere else, and then that way there won't be all this friction and turmoil. And so I couldn't agree with the guy more. And let me just defend myself in front of the intelligence and police agencies that might be listening to this. I'm not interested in forcing any of this stuff to happen. If I talk about separation and so forth, it's only going to happen because people want it and they're going to do it voluntarily and peacefully. So, I just want to make that disclaimer so that people don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that people should be taking up arms on this issue. I mean, the only time you would do that is if it gets out of hand. Now, what's happening, and what I mean by that is if let's suppose that you lived in Europe and the government has allowed the Muslims in Sweden, for instance, to have no-go zones. Okay, so that means they're the little sovereign nations unto themselves. Why couldn't they do that for the white people? Okay, and now what's happening is, the last I heard, is that they're actually training these Muslim immigrants to use firearms. So what they'll do is eventually they'll arm those Muslims and they'll wipe out the Swedes. Okay, and this will make the synagogue of Satan happy because remember they got to get rid of white people because white people are the most likely to try to resist the New World Order. In a historical stroke with resonance today, American Jewish leaders gathered in Pittsburgh in 1885. Okay, so this is, a while ago, over about almost 140 years ago or something, to produce what is known as the Pittsburgh Platform, a new theology for American Judaism, less focused on a messianic return to the land of Israel and more on fixing a broken world. The concept of tikkun olam. Jews, the rabbi behind the platform, urged, must achieve God's purpose by living and working in and with the world. Okay, what's interesting, because that's actually kind of that was the mandate that Christ gave to Christians. And so if Christians are the synagogue of God, these guys must be living and working with the world for the synagogue of Satan. For faith for thousands of years was insular and self-contained, its people often in mandated ghettos praying for the Messiah to return them to the promised land. This was a radical notion, but for most American Jews it is now accepted as a tenet of the religion, building a better, more equal, more tolerant world now where they live. Okay, so how is destroying Christian culture more tolerant? You know what I mean? How is using Hollywood to destroy morals and traditional, how is attack on traditional families tolerant? How is the war on whites tolerant? How is all the things, the policies that they're supporting, helping? We don't need that kind of help. How is 9/11 murdering 3,000 people helping us? How did that help us? That was carried out by Israeli and American Jews. That was not what they told us. It was not a Muslim operation. And I think 9/11 is going to be a big turning point to people waking up to the fact that these guys don't have our interest at heart. They're really not here to improve things. They're here to control things and exploit things. And I'm not talking about all Jews, obviously. I'm talking about the ones who support these policies that destroy traditional culture and so forth, and traditional families, and they're the ones I'm talking about. And I'm not saying, go out there and kill them. What I'm saying is let's identify them and use the rule of law against them. Thou shalt not murder. Larry Silverstein and Michael Chertoff, and above them Benjamin Netanyahu, and a number of other people, the people that owned the security company. These are the people that controlled the 9/11 event. They planned it, they controlled it, and they, carried it out, and they did the cover-up and all that. And they're in power in such a way that they control the military. You have to listen to people like pilots for 9/11 Truth, engineers for 9/11 Truth, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, scholars for 9/11 Truth, Christopher Boland, Solving 9/11, James Fetzer. These people who've done the investigation, they scratched under the surface. They just didn't believe the government. And you see, they got an airtight case against these people that did 9/11, and the idea here is to say, okay, well, if we're being controlled by this power, and they're doing evil, we should address it. Say, okay, well, there's evil things happening here. Jesus was all about the truth, telling the truth. This so-called Pittsburgh platform is ideological imperialism. It's different, okay, because as a Christian, I believe in missionaries, and I believe that if they can, if missionaries can go out and persuade or convince other cultures to adopt the teachings of Jesus, I'm all for that, as provided it's all done without force or coercion. That's not really ideological imperialism. You're just sharing an idea, and if it can, and Jesus said, if it's rejected, then don't force the issue. You go somewhere else. But this is ideological imperialism, where they control everything. The media, the academia, all those things that they said that they were condemning the Hungarian president of cleansing, all those outlets So, the way I look at it is what has to happen is we're going to continue the information war. Oh, by the way, before I go there, speaking of 9/11, I gave up on Alex Jones a while ago. At least 2 or 3 years ago, I saw that Alex Jones wasn't really dedicated to freedom. Now most of the commentators, most of the alt-right commentators, they like Alex Jones because he doesn't address the Jewish question, and I guess that's why that's why he's not dedicated to freedom, is because he himself is not free to go there, and he seems like he's so controlled. I saw that interview Joe Rogan did, and Joe Rogan, as far as I can tell, he's controlled opposition. I think he must be working for the intelligence organizations. But anyways, Alex Jones seemed like he's really drugged up or something. And he was saying, okay, they got him backtracking on. Now, he didn't backtrack on Building 7, but he backtracked on the towers. And he's saying, well, they were poorly constructed to begin with and wobbly or whatever. It sounds like something that he would say if there's a gun to his head or he's drugged up or something. Because what are we going to listen to Alex Jones and not engineers and architects about those buildings? I mean, my father was an engineer for the government, and explosives containment was one of his expertise, and he could tell, those buildings aren't going to come down like this. See, and I kind of, it caught me off guard. I started out, believing the official story. It took me a little while okay, here's the thing. It's funny. The thing that really clued me in that something was fishy. It should have been the fact that the buildings fell and they shouldn't have. That's what it should have been. But I didn't catch that until later. Okay. The thing that really turned, put up a flag for me that something was wrong about the 9/11 story was when George Bush came on and said, okay, this was the work of Islamicists, radical nationalists, Islamic nationalists, or something to this effect. And almost in the same sentence, Islam is a religion of peace. Well, let's go back to this. Okay, that's cognitive dissonance. Okay, you can't say that Islamists did this and then it's a religion of peace. You can't. That's cognitive dissonance. That's when I knew something was wrong. Because if we really let's go back to a world that was more sane. Okay, when people knew right from wrong, if they were convinced that this was Islamicists did it, that would become a war on Islam. And the fact that they didn't want a war on Islam, they said that alerted me to the fact that this is a lie. They're lying about something. So, if we're supposed to believe that, and by the way, now I don't think Muslims had anything to do with 9/11, and that doesn't mean I believe that Islam is a religion of peace either. I believe that Muslims didn't do 9/11, but Islam's not a religion of peace either. George Bush lied about both things. There were two lies. Why didn't they? Okay, so why didn't the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Ardern, why didn't she come on and say, all white nationalists, white nationalism is an ideology of peace, and we don't want this event to taint people's feelings towards white nationalists. You see, to me, why didn't you do that? That's what they did in 9/11. That's what they did. See what I mean? That would have been consistent. She should have came on, and Trump, and everybody should have been saying, okay, well, let's make sure that this doesn't turn into hatred towards whites, But they're doing the opposite. They're trying to get people to use this event to hate whites because they're having a war on whites. And so this event is going to help them in their war on whites. Or so they believe. It's not going to help. It doesn't help me. It's not convincing me at all. It's just making them seem more evil. It makes the government of New Zealand seem more evil than they ever were, because they're using this. Why wouldn't they see? They talk about tolerance and openness, and we have all these different beliefs and blah 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 blah, multiculturalism. Okay, so why did they apply the same kind of sensitivity to the Islamic community that they did after 9/11? We're supposed to believe that Muslims did that. Why? And I'm trying to distance this guy from distance this event from actual Islam. Islam's a religion of peace. Well, white nationalism is an ideology of peace, and that's what they should be talking about if they're gonna be fair. And so we know that it's not about being fair. So this shooter in New Zealand, I mean, his premise is correct. There is a war on whites. They are trying to replace and eliminate whites. And so he's working on a correct premise. And the only reason his actions are not considered justified is because he doesn't have as much firepower as the government. That's really the bottom line. Let's be totally honest. That's the only reason. Because if Madeleine Albright could say it's okay for the State Department to kill 500,000 children in the Middle East, and we're supposed to think that's justified because it's looking after certain interests. Well, this guy's looking after certain interests, and he only killed 49 people. That's less than 500,000. The 500,000 is justified, but the 49 is not. That's what we're supposed to believe. So, my objective here is to get people to be consistent, and that their lack of consistency shows that they're not to be trusted, and that as a Christian, I want to bring out the truth of the matter. Okay, let's talk about the truth of the matter. This is how it works. Okay, if you got more firepower, then you're justified in killing people. If you have less firepower, you're condemned for killing people. That's really how it works. And I didn't create the universe. That's how God created the universe. That's how it works. Okay, so I think that's the only thing that that's. Look, I find a lot of the Christian faith to be difficult, but I don't lose my faith. I believe in Jesus. I believe that he actually lived. He actually fulfilled the prophecies. He actually did miracles, and he actually rose from the dead. I believe all that because I think it's historical facts. I don't believe it because it sounds good. I just think it is historically verifiable. That okay, most of my Christian friends will insist, based on biblical passages, that Jesus is in control of the governments of the world. Well, if that's the case, then Jesus is using these murderous thugs to control things. And you have to. Here's one of the things when it comes to God and the Bible. You have to accept it. Because he's God, he has a different standard. He can do things, and they're justified. And if we do them, they wouldn't be. Such as murder, for instance, killing people or whatever. And the idea behind that is because he created things. He knows everything that we don't know about a situation, and so see, I don't. As much as I hate the idea these control freaks forcing, multi-religious societies onto people and so forth. I can also accept the fact that God is using that for a purpose, because a lot of the West has turned their back on Jesus. And as a responsible father of creation, and the discipline has to kick in, and the discipline is, look, here's your alternative. If you don't want me in charge, you can have these synagogue of Satan, and they will bring people in to replace you and wipe you out. How would a return to faith in Christ stem this event? I'm not sure. I mean, I believe that it would. It would turn things around, and avoid these evil wars and fighting and killing and so forth. That would definitely happen if there was a certain threshold of believers. The Christian evangelical has to remember that even if God's promising, return of the Jewish people to Israel, then that's not a fragile promise. You don't have to treat that as like something delicate. Like if we expose the Israelis for doing 9/11, doesn't mean somehow God's not going to be able to keep His promises. I'm exhorting the Christian community to do the right thing, and God would often accuse the Israelis of doing evil things, and if they do that, we need to agree with God. And it doesn't mean that we're out to destroy anybody or kill anybody or wipe anybody out or commit some kind of genocide or anything. It just means, look, this is what's happening, this is the truth, this is who did this is why it shouldn't be this way, they shouldn't be controlling everything and so forth. It's just a matter of telling the truth. It has nothing to do with hating people or anything like that. So, I wouldn't discourage evangelicals from supporting Israel, but I would discourage them from hiding the truth. Just because people are Israeli or Jewish, it doesn't mean they should get away with murder. It doesn't. You can't have it that way. It's not supposed to be that way. If you look at the Bible, there's numerous places in the Bible, and I want to do this. I keep talking about it. I'm going to make a giant video about God, the alt-right God in the Bible, because often the prophets were condemning Israelis for making the nations worse, more evil. And this is the whole Bolshevik thing. That's the Bolshevik thing is to make the nations more evil, make them more committed to immorality and debauchery and failure and all kinds of evil, destructive lifestyles and so forth. And God condemned that in the Bible. God said that this is what they're doing. And so my advice to the alt-right pagans is to not to see the God of the Old Testament as somebody different. I mean, if you really look at what He's doing, you'll see that He's actually behind a lot of the same values that the pagan alt-right holds up, as well as the Christian alt-right. So, there's so much combination of the kind of Old Testament Bolshevik type practices, and there's also the idea, look, that God is an ethno-nationalist, if you're into ethno-nationalism. And I think that the Christian view is that in Christ, there's the famous passage that's often misused. That in Christ there are no Jew or Gentile, free or slave, male or female, and it doesn't mean that those distinctions don't exist. It just means that God, in Christ, there's not a value different. He doesn't value one type of person more than another. But those distinctions still remain. It never doesn't say that those, things have gone away. There's no more male or female. You can't get that. So you can't also get that there's no more nations. That was not the point of the passage. But what's happening, see, is the Christian inclusivist view in terms of race and nationality and so forth is seen by the pagan alt-right as to be working against their objectives. But I'm going to try to defend and see if we can have an understanding on this particular issue to the point that it's less divisive. And that is that there's nothing in Christianity that obligates racial or national mixing. There's no obligation to do that. And this is where the synagogue of Satan has co-opted that Christian value of not counting people as spiritually inferior because of their race or their nationality, and they co-opted that and turned it into you're obligated to just allow these open society frameworks where you have diverse religions under one government. There's nothing biblical about that. The only way you would have unity like that is if everybody believed in Christ, and then you can have that kind of unity. There's nothing in Christendom or the Bible that makes it obligatory to include other races or religions in your nation. You can if you want, but there's nothing obligatory about it. You're not obligated to do those things, and it's certainly not wise to do the former, the thing with the having multiple religions. That's never wise. Okay, not to have a nation with multiple religions like that. That's a foolish thing to do, because really what happens is those religions, in order to coexist, have to water down. They have to compromise. They have to violate their consciences, and it's a way of eroding those religions and turning them into trivial things like hair color. That's clothing styles. It's a way of trivializing religion and empowering the synagogue of Satan. And the strange thing is, there isn't a movement in the synagogue of Satan to say force Africans to accept, like an Islamic African nation, to accept white Christians, for instance. There's nothing forcing them. They're not looking to do that. At least not at this point. They're not looking to tell the Islamic nations that they have to stop being Islamic nations and start being multi-religious. I don't see them doing this, you know. And I think that the right side, that the truth is going to win out here. That eventually, whether it takes Christ's return or if it's going to happen before that, eventually the world has to be organized in such a way that people are free to associate, free to disassociate, free to include, and free to exclude. And that should be, these people that want to talk about a universal Bill of Rights. I mean, that should be the only thing on that Bill of Rights, is the right to associate, disassociate, exclude, or include, and that should be the only right. That and if you look at it, read your Bible. Anybody who's read the Bible, would know that that's how Jesus and God, they're exclusivists. They have an exclusive community. There's many passages where Jesus says, okay, at the end times, he's gonna separate the wheat from the tares, the sheep from the goats. The people who believed him from the non-believers are going to be separated eternally. And if Jesus asks us to pray on earth as it is in heaven. So if that's going to be the final arrangement, then we should be working towards that now. See. That's the pattern that God is behind. That's the pattern Jesus is behind, is this, exclusivist community. Now, when it comes to Christianity, it brings up all different other kinds of issues about, when is this going to take place? I think that the vast majority, at least the Christian community that I belong to, disagrees with me in terms of the idea of having, for instance, a Christian nation. I don't see anything wrong with that, but they think that that's not what God is doing now, that right now God is just has Christians within nations, that the nations are supposed to be ruled by the synagogue of Satan, and that it's wrong for us to want a nation that's actually ruled by Christ and not the synagogue of Satan. And so I have a difference with my community about that. I think that there would be nothing wrong with a nation that's actually ruled by Christ and not the synagogue of Satan. But they think that that's not what God wants. He wants, up until Jesus returns, he wants the synagogue of Satan to be in charge of everything and everybody, and we're just here living lives that contradict what the government wants in our hearts, and as much as we can in our actions. And I guess if like when what happened with the apostles in the early days of the church, when they were commanded not to speak in Christ's name, they said they had to believe God instead of men, and they disobeyed the government on that issue. The fact that they were willing to take that stand is how things got changed. That's how you make changes, is by willing to take those stands against the synagogue of Satan. What would that look like in modern times? I think about these people that wouldn't bake the wedding cake for the same-sex marriage. I think that's what it looks like, to obeying God instead of man. It looks something like that. It almost seems like we've made no progress in 2,000 years. That's, when I think about it. I mean, that's how, it does seem that way. It seems like, see, in my mind, what would happen is, the gospel starts going out into the world, and it makes changes, and the changes permeate all of life, including the government. Now, most Christians say, no, God is going to make those changes because it permeate everything but the government. And I don't know why they make that distinction. I don't know why it seems to me that on earth as it is in heaven should include theocracies where Christ is king and he's both priest, high priest, and king. Well, it seems like Christians are willing to make him high priest, but not king. Of course, they could turn that on me and say, "Well, I'm the one who's not letting him be king because right now, as king, he wants the murderous thugs to be in charge." And I find that kind of odd, that the Prince of Peace prefers murderous thugs. I see nothing wrong with a Christian theocracy, and I think that would be a good place to start. You have one Christian theocracy, people can see that it's a great great lifestyle, and it's a great civilization. There's all kinds of progress in domestic tranquility, and what I mean by progress, I mean technological, not what the liberals call progress. The progressives call progress is really Bolshevism, but domestic tranquility and health and those sorts of things. Christ never condemned wealth. He just said you got to be rich towards God if you're going to be rich. If you are rich, you got to be rich towards God. More importantly. All right, so I'm going to leave you with this nice, beautiful piece of music by Bibu Silvetti of Spain. And see you next time I feel like talking. Take care.